Welcome to Ready to Redo. I'm itsjjyang and we're kicking off our third season. Today is all about the different schooling options we have out there, most of which people don't find out about possibly ever. Odds are you know mainstream and special ed and maybe Montessori, but today we're unpacking the whole spectrum, which goes from schools catered specifically to refugee backgrounds to public re-engagement schools all about well-being, mental health and flexibility, student agency schools, and completely to the other end of unschooling, where the standard school structure doesn't exist at all. I list out many school names in the notes, unfortunately only in Melbourne as I'm based here, though you could apply the concepts to where you are. So if you're a parent who wants to know what's out there, a teacher, perhaps issues in your current job just might not exist in other school settings, and anyone curious about where they could have gone to school if you knew about it, this is the episode for you. Enjoy! Okay, so welcome back to season 3. What is now season 3 of Ready to Redo. It has been 3 years of a hiatus, and I am so excited to say that we are back. I'm back to do more episodes and more interviews and more discussions around education as a holistic topic, but then, deep diving into alternative and what I am really passionate about. I mean, 2.5 years, 3 years, in that short blip of a second, I have gone and done my Masters of Teaching, and I am now a qualified teacher. I have gone into state and taught. I have then gone and taught in a variety of different settings, and that's actually what prompted this episode today, which is about the whole holistic spectrum of education with the broad brush of what I have taught across these couple of years. People are generally aware of mainstream education and special needs schools, but when I say alternative and the schools that I've been teaching at also, and what I know of, it is so much beyond that. And things, schools, organizations that I've seen in Melbourne, just in Melbourne, which I had no idea existed. And so this is to highlight, you're very lucky if you're Melbourne based, because then maybe you can sort of look into it and do your own research. And really, let's just kick it off with what we know currently, which is if I say I work at a school, everyone is going to assume you work at a mainstream school. So this will probably take up, if we are looking at a spectrum of education, as 100%. Around, don't quote me on my maths, this around 85%, really, give or take, would be dedicated to mainstream schooling. And this could be public, it could be private, it could be independent, it doesn't matter. It's the structure of mainstream schooling, which we are all aware of, which is the typical multiple subjects that you have in a very teacher-centered delivery of information and very much a government educational system delivery of curriculum. And that's the main point of it. It doesn't really focus that much on well-being and more student-led or student autonomy sort of things. You might see schools here and there which do that, but largely it's there to deliver curriculum and work towards a high school diploma. So that is, in a nutshell, I'm not going to go into detail about mainstream. We all know about it. But when I say, for example, that's 85%, when I say I work in an alternative school, for example, a different school, then people start to go, is that special needs schools? And yes, actually, that is very valid. That is correct. Special needs schools are alternative. So they are focusing on the special needs, meaning intellectual disabilities or physical disabilities, whether they be dedicated specifically to students with autism, or if they are a broad brush and welcome all students of all disabilities. It just depends on the school, but I have worked at schools mainly catered towards autism. So yes, this is alternative schooling. It has a different curriculum, of course. It still is very much similar to mainstream schooling in that way of structure of how lessons are delivered. So within the mainstream, this is a little bit more alternative. So we're getting there. And then when you say alternative schools, A lot of people start thinking of the arts-based schools of Steiner. We will go into that. But yes, that is further along as well. Before we get into that though, there are other schools. Now, schools which people aren't really aware of. This next one is dedicated to recently immigrated students. So EAL, English as an Additional Language in Australia. And this could involve, for example, Blackburn English Language School. It's a school that is a transitionary stage for students who have just moved to a different country. Their English needs to be improved in a way that they can then understand class in a traditional setting or whatever school system they want to go into, but it is to help them bridge into that environment. And you see a lot more catering towards EAL literacy programs. And really I love it. I've worked in situations or I've worked in schools like this. And it really is a very inclusive space and a safe space for students who are just starting to integrate into a different schooling system. Especially, I can't imagine someone teaching you in a completely different language and you just having to understand. It's incredible. So big kudos to the families and the kids who are in these situations. And I'm very glad these schools exist. We also have other EAL schools and some ranging from independent. And so River Nile School is in North Melbourne. And this school is a very, very interesting school. It is dedicated, so they only admit women who are refugee or asylum seekers, and really is an incredible curriculum and program and organization that is there to empower women and to really support their learning, but in a very catered way. Also, what's really interesting about River Nile School is that it's very culturally responsive and very trauma informed, as well as having a heavy literacy focus. So a lot of different elements that make this school very, very unique. I really love this. I mean, manifest it. I'm going to interview someone from River Nile School. So fingers crossed. But the fact that I only really know River Nile School as opposed to other schools, there must be plenty. There must be plenty of schools just like this, or with different catering towards different demographics that exist. So that's just one example. Now, one of the bigger portions of the education spectrum is also public, independent, whatever it may be, but schools that are catered towards the well-being, being trauma-informed, and really focused on re-engaging students into school. So a lot of these are public schools, actually. You will find them in your suburbs. And for example, Fitzroy High School or Collingwood Alternative. I mean, these are just based in a specific region, but they exist everywhere. There's also Berry Street. There is also Indy College. It's really interesting to see that not many people are aware unless, for example, if you're a parent and are forced, this is what usually happens. A parent is forced to seek other options when their kid does not mesh well with students in a mainstream schooling. For example, and what's very common is students who are bullied in school for various reasons. Really upsetting, by the way, whether they are LGBTQIA+, or whether they have very significant anxiety or depression. Like it doesn't really, there's no clear reason why kids end up selecting alternative re-engagement schools, but those are pretty common. And so these schools, which I have worked at and volunteered at and done significant work with, are very highly flexible, and they really do focus on the well-being of the student. What you can see in those sorts of schools as well is that they are first name basis with the teachers. They don't have uniforms, and it is just a significantly more relaxed environment. So what I mean though by relaxed is mainly that the teacher do as I say hierarchy that you'll see generally in school is less present, largely because they're more aware of what could be going on in the kid's life, which is also easier to achieve because the class sizes are a lot smaller. The maximum that I've ever seen in one class is around 15 students, and that was quite a big class. So that sort of focus on the kids' lives is really, really big in these schools. And these schools generally are more social work, youth work focused, and they have a lot more knowledge that is really incorporating these different sectors. Academics wise, it depends on the school, but a lot of them do not prioritize that, because what they see is a lot of the students will struggle to even come to school. And if they do come to school, there might be a lot of behavior issues or a lot of issues that they need to be, teachers, workers really need to be aware of and ready to support. There is always a breakfast program. There is always a supportive program for them, and very catered towards dynamics between students as well. Generally, these schools will be smaller, and there is a lot more independence or flexibility around the students. If the student doesn't feel well, as in if they are heightened, the schools know exactly the protocol to minimize or to support that sort of behavior so that it doesn't impact other students. So for example, I've seen where students have demonstrated really intense behaviors and it hasn't actually resulted in anything like a fight, but the teachers have noticed and they've removed the students from class before something has resulted. And this is done through a really restorative way. A lot of these schools practice unconditional positive regard, which I won't go into detail, but it's basically acknowledging the student and not seeing their behavior as a negative indication on themselves, and to constantly be there with high positive regard so that when they return, it is just a continuation of a positive school environment. This is quite different from, for example, traditional suspensions or detentions, because it does welcome the student back. So, for example, if they've been kindly asked to go home for the day, if they have definitely had escalated behavior, they are welcome the next day to come back and to go through restorative practices and to understand what they could have done and how to minimize that sort of behavior in the future. So what you would see is, I've written down a list. There is, for example, Saints, which is renamed in 2025, Saints in North Melbourne, Hester Hornbrook, Berry Street, Fitzroy High, Sydney Road in Sydney Road Community School in Brunswick, Collingwood Alternative. These are the free, I'm pretty sure I got it right. These are free. These are government schools, and I'm really happy that they exist, because seeing the students there, they really enjoy it. And then independent schools, but also within this sector is Berengarra School and Prace. And they also, they're fee paying, but they are also the same sort of style, re-engagement, not so much focused. Their priority isn't, again, academics. It's more so engagement, re-engagement, well-being. Berry Street is one of the most iconic ones, I would say, just because it is taught across many, many schools, as in even if you're a mainstream school, Berry Street workers will come and do professional development sessions and share their learning. And so mainstream schools are really trying. I just want to disclaimer that mainstream schools are really, really trying to become more trauma informed, because they do realize that a lot of the students who go to mainstream schools are experiencing issues that Berry Street can help with. You can go to the actual Berry Street school, but obviously it's not accessible for everyone, like location wise or whatever it may be. So they will bring it to these schools. But what you see is that in mainstream schools, it's very hard to implement a culture within a school without subverting and upturning the structure that exists. Berry Street does very well, the school itself, because its structure was literally founded on Berry Street, trauma-informed, well-being focused literature. And so everything about it, whether it be the ready to learn scale or something like that, I remember learning about it too. A lot of it is, and brain breaks and all these, etc., like sensory things as well. They exist within the Berry Street School, and with mainstream schools, it's just really hard to effectively implement this sort of stuff in schools that have only had one professional development session in a term for that specific topic. So it is very hard, but I do see schools really trying, and that's great. There are also, I will just very quickly highlight that there is a school called Templestowe College. I need to research more about this. Really, I do. It's still a government school, but it is completely subverting the idea of learner, and it is questioning the autonomy, the agency, and where it should be. So students are given a lot more agency within their learning, within things like running the tuck shop, with doing tours, and with all of these other sort of jobs that in mainstream schooling generally you will not see them do. And Templestowe College. So look into that if you are interested in more student agency based schools. It is very interesting, and it is more focused on, the flexibility of the curriculum in a way, and more so the role and autonomy of a student. So really, really look into that. Now we are going into other alternative schools, which are predominantly fee paying and quite, more similar to private school fees now. And they are sort of what people are aware of with Montessori, with Steiner. I have a few others written down, which also have very similar ethos, but are obviously very different. So let's start with Montessori. Montessori schools are alternative, more, creative in a way, but it's more so focused on the holistic education of a kid. So it starts from preschool, and actually what you'll see is so many Montessori philosophy-based early childhood programs. That is generally where you will see them most. In high school, it starts to drop off, as in it's very rare compared to the amount of early learning and primary school centers that exist for Montessori and based in Montessori. Named after Maria Montessori, who I'm pretty sure was an educator herself. She really valued and observed students in the natural play state and their learning and the curiosity. And so this program, this education philosophy, stems from the natural innate curiosity of a kid and trying to nurture that. And so what you see is that in the learning environment, it is very much catered towards the kid. So everything is built from the eye line of the kid, literally, as in when they are that short, like kids are short. So when they're looking around, like what do they see? And so things architecture-wise is designed for the kid. It's also very play-based and very active. This is a big part of Montessori where they are active, kids are active learners, active participants within their learning, which is very different to most mainstream schools where it's a delivery process of the teacher delivering and giving information to students. Whereas this is more so teachers are not so much deliverers, but they are guides. And so they might give an assessment, but it is sort of scaffolded in a way where the students end up trialing different things and them making mistakes and trying to figure out what is expected and really to lead their own way in how to achieve this. And so obviously with active guidance from the teacher, but they have a lot more leeway to deciding more how they approach something. And what you see also besides self-directed learning is different pace at which you study. So if you are doing an assessment and you're running over or you're slower than others, it doesn't matter. It's more flexible. And what you see though with that is that once you get into secondary school, it is a lot harder to maintain this sort of environment. And what I noticed when I was observing these schools in person is that when you are early learning and when you are in primary school, it is very much catered towards the students and they have a lot of flexibility around what they do when they do it, and what sort of support they get from the teachers. But then once you get into high school, it is definitely more focused on those international baccalaureates, so IB or VCE, if they choose to go that pathway, or towards the vet pathway, as I was talking about earlier, that sort of pathway exists now. And so it starts to become a lot more stock standard. And I mean, I want Montessori to prove me wrong. I really want to talk to someone who works there, because I also wonder how different it becomes when you have more pressure from society in terms of university, tertiary. So you'd have to go down that route, and that usually ends up becoming more studying and more test delivery and that sort of stuff that Montessori is trying to work around, and not be so curriculum content delivery as opposed to the student designing their own thing. And yeah, besides that, Montessori is really focused on freedom and independence and hands-on practical learning. What you do notice is that, unfortunately, it is quite expensive. So I was looking at the fees for this year. For prep, it is $17,600 AUD. And then for year 11 and 12, it is $26,100. So it is a bit pricier. And I think my goals, my envision of utopia would be schools that exist like this, but are more accessible for the general public, which, I mean, I really hope I could even do one. To be honest, I can make one after a lot of guidance and a lot of working in the education system. And yeah, so with Montessori, teachers are more so collaborators, and they are up at the front trying to deliver something. And what you see also besides Montessori is Steiner. So Steiner is named after Rudolf Steiner, Steiner schools, and they are similar in a way, but they are looking at creativity through the arts. Arts is a big focus within Steiner schools. So Steiner, much like Montessori, is really based on the holistic child. So not just looking at more so the academic side of things, but also the whole well-being and spiritual and emotional sides of the child. It is very play-based as well, and also very practical in its activities in terms of using the body and really developing the senses through different activities. And also it's really big on student autonomy and student-driven learning. So curriculum that's based off of the student's curiosity as opposed to following things that have already been designed by someone else. What I noticed though when I was observing these schools is that, I mean, a lot of what they do is quite interesting. For example, they don't use technology as in laptops and ICT until a certain age, which I respect in a certain way, but I also think my opinion is that students need to do what prepares them for the world ahead. As in, schools, in my opinion, need to prepare and give relevant skills for kids in the future. And I mean, digital literacy is one of the most important things that you can have right now. So that, and then also everything is done through a blackboard. I mean, it's not really much different to a whiteboard. It's just older. See, okay, I don't have a problem with that. I don't know why I brought it up. Okay, and then besides Steiner, you also have Alia College and you have Preshil. Other schools that are independent are fee paying, and they also notice these issues within mainstream, so they're actively trying to address it, but then they have their own niche priorities. Alia College really stresses that it is in between. It really focuses on the independent learner, but then also focusing on the academic side. So they're really not ignoring that. And then, so beyond that, now we're moving further into the other spectrum of the education system, where we are now leaning into alternative, but homeschooling. And so, caveat, disclaimer, before you like homeschooling, because a lot of people think a certain idea of homeschooling. So I'm going to start with homeschooling, where legally the students are under the branch of homeschooling, but they are studying at learning centers, which are more flexible and generally less hours than the typical Monday to Friday, where they are catered towards still delivering lessons and delivering classes, but through more flexibility and student-led, student-driven ideas, whether it be suggestions from the kids or projects that they want to work on. It's very much catered towards that. So, for example, I mean, I actually interviewed Amy Damant, who created Celebrate Learning, which is a learning center, learning organization. That is in episode 35 if you would like to check that out. And that is dedicated for homeschoolers. And it offers lessons throughout the day that the students choose from, and they are either brainstormed by the students themselves and requested, or they are created by Amy herself. And it really is more so that delivery of curriculum, but in a looser way. And so the students have a lot more flexibility around what they learn and how they learn it. And it's really small, as in not many students. And so what is a bit different between Celebrate Learning and what I just mentioned before of alternative Montessori, Steiner, Alia College, etc., is that these are leaning towards huge flexibility, that there is no curriculum, there is no prescribed route to take, because it's very flexible and up to the student's suggestions and what feels organic. And a lot of it could be project-based. It's broad, it's very vast. You can decide to go one way and just pursue that for a long time. So there is less pressure to output a test, for example. I don't think tests exist in these sorts of environments, whereas in Montessori and within Steiner, they do exist. And then from there, then we go into more homeschooling, as in the other side where they actually are learning from home with a curriculum, right? So that's the typical thing that you have, where your parents deliver a curriculum based on the Victorian curriculum or wherever you are. And it is very flexible, but then also has a basis from which you can work from. So different again from the Learning Centre, because again, Learning Centre doesn't really have a solid academic structure. And then from there also you have completely online schools that are catered towards homeschoolers. So that's also wild. One's called Prisma. I actually interviewed the CEO in episode 53, Victoria, as well as interviewing their educational lead, Emily, who was interviewed in episode 51. And this sort of school is very interesting as well, because it has more so a startup-y, more tech origin. And so the school is really focused on project-based learning and really focused on creativity and innovation and skills that are necessary for the 21st century, which again is different from, say, Montessori and Steiner, because they are more focused on arts and a different structure, and also the fact that they are delivered physically. So Prisma is really working with the learner, with the parents as well, to design, to create projects, to have peer-to-peer feedback, to have mentoring, to have, all of this stuff which you wish that in mainstream education would exist as well. But given the resources and given the time and the burnt outness of teachers, you can't imagine a teacher to mentor every single, one-on-one with every single student. It would be quite impossible. So that exists as well on Prisma, which you will see future episodes on, because I'm currently talking to them. Okay. Then finally, and this actually, I'm not sure if it exists no, it does exist. I take that back. Unschooling. Unschooling is the other format where you are homeschooling as an unschooler. For example, a really good intro to this is episode 14 with Blake Bowles, where I interviewed him, who is a pioneer within unschooling. He's based in America, and a lot of the unschooling movement started in America. And with this though, this is now the other end. We started, maybe 20 minutes ago, we started with mainstream schooling and what we all know. And now we are at unschooling. Unschooling is literally not the antithesis. I won't go as far to say that, but it is definitely criticizing in a way the structure of school. And it is then saying the student, the kid, actually not a student, the child is the leader of their education. They decide when, they decide what to learn. And so there is no pressure on them to have a for example, deadline, unless if enforced by a parent or something, if they're more guided by the parent. But it is really up to the kid to understand what they want and how they're going to go about doing it. And I mean, Blake did tell me a lot of stories about, for example, one student or one child who had ended up going to university at maybe 16, 15, because they were really interested in, I'm pretty sure it was medieval or some sort of knights or that sort of aesthetic. And they were really interested, and they noticed that a university subject was delivering that information. And so they wanted to attend, and they ended up attending. But you could imagine with unschooling, it really requires a lot of independence and a lot of motivation, intrinsic motivation on behalf of the kid. I mean, you could go the other way where parents are afraid that if they unschool, or just people in general who criticize unschooling could say, if a kid doesn't want to do maths, which is very typical, I mean, very classic, then they may never start because they are in charge of their own learning. And if they don't want to do something, then they don't have to. And so that is the spectrum. Let's recap. So there is mainstream schooling. There is special needs schools. There are schools that are for re-engagement, so trauma-informed, well-being focused for students who really need more the social and youth work-centered approach. Then you have EAL specifically for English as an additional language students. Then you also have alternative schools such as Montessori and Steiner. And then you also have completely homeschooling where you have learning centers, but then you also have unschooling. So there is so much in this short episode of the amount and opportunities and options that you have with schooling. And so we are going to wrap up there. That is a lot for you to think about, to mull over, to chew on, and I will see you next time. Bye.